Welcome to the Dramatic Workshop Podcast, a podcast discussing upcoming productions and events, interviewing members, and introducing you to artists in the community as well as abroad. Now, here are your hosts, Keith Prince, Hannah Vitti, Amber Schmidt, Ethan King, and Joshua Rosengrant.
Welcome to this episode of the Dramatic Workshop Podcast. I'm Josh Rosengrant, your host for this evening. Tonight we're doing a special tribute episode for our friend Ed Berens, longtime costume designer for the Dramatic Workshop. Tonight we're going to be doing some reminiscing and some nice stories. So let's just start from the beginning. First, let me also introduce who I have tonight as guests. That would be so much help. Tonight I have Heather Strauss, Eileen Coulter, and Harold Ty, all from the Dramatic Workshop as board members. So thanks guys for coming on. Feel free while we're going through, you guys can we'll just talk as we go through. But how did Ed get involved with theater? Does anyone know how that started out?
Well, my understanding is that Ed had been, in his younger years, of course, he's a Monticello graduate, and he was part of the workshop growing up and in his early adult years. And then, of course, Ed was an excellent special education teacher, and moved down to New York City for several years to take a job down there, teaching special education students in the New York City School District. And then he came back up here in, I think it was the early 2000s, and was close to retirement, retired, and like a lot of us, needed something to do, and so he got back involved with the workshop again. Periwinkle was formed by, it was a national group of actors who did children's and school theater, and it was founded, one of the co-founders of Periwinkle was, of course, a co-founder of Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop, Son of Rosh.
So also, Ed went to college in New Paltz, received degrees in education and special education, and retired with 30 years of service on the Board of Education. That in itself is quite an accomplishment. I mean, forgetting about theater, the man was so smart, and taught special education in itself is such a great thing, I think. So also, I found out, I did not know, he did costumes with Forceburg. Anyone know about how that went? What shows he worked on at Forceburg?
Ed was worked costumes down at Forestburg, and also for the I think it was the Brooklyn National Opera or something. And he knew the founders, Craig and Greg, the founders of Forestburg, and so that's how we got involved down there. So he, for many years, was their costume designer down there, and then we were lucky enough to grab him up, when he moved back up to the area here.
So then he comes to our place, the Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop. Made quite an impression. I don't remember one show, except for Heather later down the line, where he wasn't doing costumes or involved in some way. Either he was acting on stage, he was doing costumes. He had quite the involvement with our company. So, do you remember his early when he first started out with the Dramatic Workshop?
I came on the workshop, it was about 2006, and he had not quite started with us then. And I would say probably close to the year we started doing shows, like it was right, I think Amber had made had thought about it was right around Fiddler on the Roof. And right after that, we did Fantastics. And I think that's when he started doing the costumes. And when I say he does costumes, he didn't go to the store, buy something, tweak it, make it look like it should be. Ed actually built costumes from the ground up. He was a tailor. He was someone that could build a dress, build a gown, and make it look like something that came out of Kleinfeld's or Saks Fifth Avenue. They were magnificent pieces he made, and he took such pride in the work. It wasn't just, I put a costume on you. He was the costume designer, and that's how I remember Ed first working with him. But I believe the first show I saw him in was an Agatha Christie show, and he was hysterical. He is a very funny man. So he was just as talented on stage as he was off.
I don't know if anybody has been to his house and seen his sewing room. I was there when he was doing the costumes for Forum, and he had an incredible setup. A whole area of his house was devoted to costumes, and he was very hesitant to let anybody else in there or do anything with them. So it's good guy.
And he always put a unique spin on every character he took, and it was always right. You never questioned that. Gee, is that really? No, he had it spot on every time.
And quite the person that always did his research. When I directed a Bright New Boise, it was last year or the year before, but anyway, he did costumes for the show. And I had an idea or two. And I was like, oh, no. Here's what we're going to do. And actually came to rehearsal with textbooks, or not textbooks, but like research. And it said, this is what I see. And had so much knowledge of costumes, not just of making costumes, but of different shows, of people, of costumes from different shows. And he had such great ideas. And if Ed Berens had a great way of selling you on a costume.
Harold, when you mentioned Beauty and the Beast and his characterization of Lumiere, he was amazing. But let's bear in mind that he built most of those costumes. Did have to purchase like Cogsworth and Lumiere because they were so technically heavy, and they weren't just a dress, or it was pieces. But he built the costumes for all the other characters. He built Belle's dress, he built her father, he did all the other characters. And it was amazing that we were blown away by some of the things, and people commented on that. And I believe he did win an award for that too.
Well, you had a lot of people who come up to us, at the workshop, and they say, well, I'd like to get involved, and I've done theater before. I was in my high school musical and blah, 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 that kind of thing. And then you talk to them and you realize that, they're relatively novices at it. But that's why we call it a workshop. But I just remember the first costume discussion I had with Ed, and he said, well, I'll have to build this one, or I'll have to build that one. And you knew right away, because seamstresses make things, costume designers build things. So, and that's, you could just tell right away that Ed knew what he was talking about.
Absolutely. And I think even when it comes time for crunch time, you think he's not going to get the costumes in on time. What are we going to do? When you needed those costumes, they were there, and they weren't just there. They were so great from the bottom to the top. It didn't matter if you were the tree in the back. You were the greatest tree in the back. It was that good of costumes.
And then there was his acting. I think that in my theater experience, his portrayal in the show Bent was so incredibly outstanding. It'll stay with me forever.
There are a lot of roles that, like I said, he took and he ran with it, and you knew as a director that he would come up with ideas that you hadn't thought of, and you knew as an acting partner, a scene partner with him, that he was going to be right there all the time.
But I remember him in two shows distinctly. One was Cuckoo's Nest, that he was so amazing in, and the one show where he played that character Teddy, Arsenic and Old Lace. It was the Agatha Christie one then. He was, it's the first time I saw him on stage, and I was just blown away. He was so funny, marching up and down the stairs with a bugle in his hand. Oh my God. He could just make you laugh, and he could be serious. He was quite an all-around actor. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that.
My favorite always is the comedy. My favorite is Into the Woods, the old man from Into the Woods, just because I've never seen a person overact a death scene, but it was so funny. I backstage and I'm on the side and I'm just dying laughing. My brother had all he could do just to get that funny. And I think he's done that a few times where he just, and even the smallest parts usually end up being the most hilarious when it comes to Ed Berens. And he certainly had quite the softer side. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was almost every single rehearsal, it didn't matter what show it was, he would be out with a group of people. It was usually me and maybe a few others outside the theater and just talking. It could be about the show, it could be about the rehearsal, but I just remember just talking about life with Ed for the longest time. And Jim would just come back later on, maybe an hour or two later, and be like, "You guys are still here? Yeah, we're just talking." And then finally, Ed's like, I guess you have to go home at some point, so I'll let you go. Those those sometimes were the hardest because to just walk away, because you had such great conversations with the man. He could tell you stories about so many different people who have been with the workshop and in theater that you just wanted to just stay there longer just to reminisce.
I can tell you, when you said a softer side of Ed, um, we had rehearsal one night, and I had a family issue, a major problem that had happened. And I knew I had to go to rehearsal. I couldn't miss it. And I walked in, and he happened to be standing in the lobby, and he looked at me, and I walked over and I said, "Ed," and he looked up at me, and I burst into tears, and he just put his arms around me and just let me cry. I ruined his shirt because he always had these beautiful tailored shirts. I literally soaked his shirt crying, and he just let me cry on his shoulder, um, until I could breathe again. And he said, "Help me, let's go wipe your face off, and then help me go inside so we can get ready for rehearsal." But he was always kind when needed.
uh, when it came time for musicals, especially with the choreography, I don't think there was ever a better dancing person than Ed Berens. And I mean that in the best way possible, because there's always this small group of people in every musical where we just stayed in the back and swayed. And I was always with Ed, and we were the greatest swayers of all time. And we just had so much fun with it. He's like, "No, Josh, you got to move with it. You got to." And even the smallest things, he just made the greatest things. And during rehearsal, I've had it so many times where he would just, "Can you believe this is happening right now?"
So Ed was, I'm sure lots of other people have said this, or some version of it. Ed was quite an interesting character, and the many characters that he played. But I think the biggest character was Ed himself. We had a volatile relationship. There were times when he was at my throat, but we always got through that, and we always made up, which was great. And I think that his contributions, both on stage and the amazing costume designs. Oh my gosh. I have some very fond memories of Ed's work, and having worked with him as a director and him doing costume designs for the shows that I'd done. We collaborated pretty closely, and he had an eye, he had strong opinions, and he had amazing talent. I know that even in the volatile moments, it was because he felt he wasn't being appreciated for something that he had done. And I hope that he knew that I always appreciated what he did, because he was amazing. I remember sitting at a festival with him. I forget how many years ago this was, and we're sitting, and you know, when you go to tennis festival, you're thinking this is the best of the best from around the state. We leaned over to each other and said, "This got chosen for festival?" about some show. and or he'll lean over and say, "What is she dressed? What did they dress her in? What is she wearing?" We went to Ellen and Ed and I and Scott Eckers went to see a production of the Rocky Horror Show, and we went to a production of the Rocky Horror Show, and Ed leans over to me about 5 minutes into the production and said, "They spent more on boots for this production than we spend on an entire production," which was true. He was quite the character, and I collaborated with him on so many productions, and I'm gonna miss him.
I always found that Ed was always very welcoming if you said, "Do you need help?" And if there was something he would share with you, he would be more than happy to say, "Yes, could you get this? Could you do that?" He was also very generous when it came to other people being interested. He always allowed me to go to him with ideas, because if he was doing my costume, we would sit and talk about the costume, what he thought, what he liked. And I said, could I work on it? You know, I can order some of the pieces for it or whatever we were doing. And he would say, absolutely, go for it. Let me see it. So as long as, you know, he gave other people leeway to do some of the work too, to learn and work with him on things like that, which was also something. Not everyone is that open and willing to share their work like that. They get very, they want to do their own thing and have their own thing on the stage. And he was so good about doing that and being open. And I always had fun because I got a chance to play with my costumes. And I think my favorite costumes were from Sweeney Todd, because he specifically picked out the costumes, picked out the colors, and got to play with them. And, you know, Ed, what do I need to do? It wasn't just costumes to him. It was, Heather, let's fix your hair a different way. Let's do this. Let's, make sure you change your makeup. And he was so meticulous with each character. If you were willing to go to him and ask for his help too, he wouldn't just jump on you, and say, you should do this. He would share his ideas, not just tell you you have to do it his way, which, most people don't realize that.
So to continue on what we were talking about when it came for costumes, when you had one of his costumes, not only was it a great costume to look at, but as an actor, it helped to develop your character. I truly believe that when you put on one of his costumes, it really helped for you to personally get into your character. And the great thing about it was that you got your costume usually when it was time to need it, right at like Hell Week going into the first weekend. Well, welcome to our continued discussion of our tribute to Ed Berens. We'll start off with any reminiscing stories. Does anyone would like to start? Just go right at it.
Okay, my name is Sally, and I've known Ed for 18 years probably, since I moved here to Never Never Land. Okay, I first met Ed in Third Violet. He was doing all those damn costumes, and I thought, this one person is doing costumes for this whole show? Well, anyway, they were excellent. They were superb. And I just couldn't believe that one person costumed the whole musical. So I first met him there, and we really didn't chat much, but he was busy poking pins and doing all sorts of things. So, I just said, okay, whoever he is, that's fine. Ed was the master of the aside. Where you get the aside and you say, boy, what a bastard he is. And he'd do that whether it was at a meeting, a play, especially a workshop meeting. He'd be, and you'd have to go, not now, Ed, not now. But anyway, he was absolutely the master of the aside. Usually it was him saying, oh, what a pile of shit this is. Hey, he was diabetic. And the first time I ever saw him have an attack or whatever they do, I'm going, oh my God, what do we do? And he carried around a little ditty bag usually, but we thumbed through that and we couldn't find his insulin or anything. So we're going, what do we do? Let's run across the street and get some candy or something. But meanwhile, he kept rocking and carrying on. He said, I'll be fine. Well, anyway, that was my first attempt at helping somebody who was diabetic and he was ready to go. And it scared the bejesus out of me. Well, anyway, I loved his laugh. His laugh was just so clean and so funny. And it continued and continued. And he was a slapper after a while. So he'd get laughing and he'd get, okay. And I enjoyed that so much. He always spoke up. And I always speak up. And I liked that about him very, 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 very much. He loved gardening and he was good. He was very good at this. Ed, thanks for all you've given. Love you.
I remember the first time I met Ed. I didn't really meet him. I was at a show. It was one of the first shows I ever attended at the Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop. And the curtains had got drawn, and yet this little man was still standing on the stage. And at first I asked my wife, I was like, Julianne, is that Gilbert Godfrey? I'm like, oh my God, you guys have Gilbert Godfrey here. She's no, that's Ed. I said, who's Ed? She's like, you'll meet him. So I was so impressed by how he commanded the audience. Now, I had never done any acting at the theater at that point. I was just there to support Lynn at the moment. And, everybody comes off stage and we're talking to everybody. I came over, it's like, you had me in stitches. I don't remember what he was saying, but he had me crying. I was in tears. Later, I got the pleasure to work with him after I was, I don't really understand how I ended up as Jock Allen. Because I had never done a musical a day in my life. The closest thing I came to theater was high school. I got to play Rensfield in Dracula at one point. And Ed's sitting there and he's like, we got to take your measurements. And he's got me over in the corner. He's stay still. And all I can remember is how commanding he was then too. But he was such a huge support in that, because like I was terrified. I don't normally do big things. Like now I'm addicted, but at the time I wasn't. And here I am doing the Scottish accent, and now I have to sing the song. And I remember he pulls me to the side. He's like, your shirt's not tucked in. And he's tucking my shirt in madly behind me. I'm like, oh my God, what's happening right now? And he turns to me, he's like, don't be nervous. No one gives a shit. And it was the most relaxing comment I've ever heard. Because at the time, I was so scared. And then he was like, nobody cares. And he couldn't have been more right, because in that moment when you're on the stage, really, it's just you. It's you in that moment. And I think it was such a pleasure to see Ed in those moments. To see him in Into the Woods as the old man, and him struggling in the back to get the goddamn beard to stick on, was its own show. Literally, the damn glue doesn't work. Like, as he's back there with this long gray hair and this beard, and he's shuffling around. He was a very, very large presence, and I think he's going to be very missed. I know he's going to be very missed.
no doubt. You know, for such a small, compact individual, I think that's very appropriate that he had a large personality and certainly a large presence. And you know, with Ed, maybe you just don't realize it. Like I didn't, and I really didn't know him, you know, all that well. But when you look back and look at the scope of his work, both on stage and off stage, certainly, you know, with these costumes, I mean, my goodness gracious, and it's just a tremendous, you know, just breadth of work that he's produced, that he's shared with all of us. And you know, when I heard the news of his passing, I just, you know, made that comment that just what a tremendous loss for really for humanity in general, certainly, but you know, for the workshop, for Sullivan County, for the arts in general. And prior to actually being directly involved with the workshop, I patronized the workshop for many years. And Ed worked for the New York City Board of Education, as did I. So, and you know, just like talking in the lobby, we got to know one another, and we kind of commiserated, you know, regarding our experiences, you know, with the Board of Ed. And as Sally said, you know, Ed certainly spoke his mind, and you knew where he stood, and especially if he was displeased with something. And I remember a few years ago when I attended a board meeting, and I said, you know, in regard to possibly um, uh, establishing a fundraiser for the workshop, I introduced those daily number tickets that we sell, because we had done that for years at my school for our union, for our North Rockland High School scholarships. And then later on, when I ran a travel baseball team, we used these tickets to raise money. So I thought it was a good idea to maybe introduce them to the workshop, and maybe this would be something that would allow us to, you know, earn some money. And a couple of people, Ed being one, they were very skeptical of the whole idea, and it's probably not going to be worth it, and you know, it's and but Ed was very verbose and very demonstrative in regard to, you know, his opposition to this whole thing. I mean, like, and you know, like spittle started to you remember, you know, Ed, you know, and he was like really like kind of like right in my face. And I honestly, it was uncomfortable, but I kind of tried to break the tension. I said, you know, you're not going to hit me, are you? And he just looked at me like with his Ed look. He said, don't be ridiculous. And that's like just a wonderful memory that I have of Ed. And it just, you know, I was telling Angela, again, for someone, again, I really didn't know all that well. I was really devastated by the news, and I certainly will miss him. And whenever things like this happens, and I know we all feel this way, I know this, but everyone that I'm looking at right now, we're all special to one another. And I think, and I'm as guilty of it as anyone, but sometimes I think we all forget the connection that we all have and how special we are to each other. And I mean this sincerely. I cherish all of these moments with all of you. I mean that. And God, I hope that we can all be together as soon as possible. I hope we have a season. And if there's anything good that's come out of this COVID mess, is that we all have a greater appreciation for just the simple things of just gathering in that beautiful little theater and making magic happen again. And so God bless you, Ed, your memory, and all of you. Thank you all for being you.
I had to smile because one of the things that struck me is you said that you guys dealt with the New York Board of Ed. I was never bored of Ed, ever. I mean, ever. I mean, he, and I know that, but he was not somebody who you ever were bored with. Sometimes you wanted to strangle him, right? Sometimes you just wanted to go up and give him a great big hug. I mean, there's just so many different things. But when I first started with the workshop, I hadn't been on stage legitimately for 15 years. And I just sort of tried out on a whim because Sally was doing Death of a Salesman. And it's a great show. And my kids were, my one was going off to college. The other one was, like a senior in high school, junior in high school, somewhere in there. And I didn't need to have as much. I had some time open because, you go to sporting events, you go to all this stuff. And I had some time open. So I was like, I'm going to go try out. I haven't done this in a while. Let's go see what we can do. So I went and tried out, and poor Sally got stuck with me. And Ed played my teenage son. Okay, that's the first thing I want you to keep in mind. Ed played my teenage son. Okay. Or no, my teenage son's friend. Excuse me. I don't think he was his friend. Yeah. The point being that at that point, there was a teenager's age between the two of us, and it went the other direction. So that was kind of the first thing. And he was so versatile. But he could do anything. He had better legs than I do. There's no question, because he looked better in a dress than I have ever dreamed of looking in a dress. I've seen him several times, and he just could pull it off. It was quite impressive, actually. Everybody, you recognized his voice. I could have been in the grocery store, not even thinking about Ed. And if he was talking 12 aisles over, I knew Ed was in the store. I'd be like searching him out. Where'd he go? Where is he? But I'll never forget it. Funny stuff. You never forget these things. I've been in so many shows with Ed. It seemed like every show I was in, and I was in quite a few of them, he was always there. And if he wasn't actually in the show, which was rare, he was doing the costumes. And he was out there singing, and he was out there just, he was such a big supporter of the things we were doing. But when we were in Death of a Salesman, I had never met Ed. And we went through all these rehearsals and everything. And Ed was like really cold and distant to me, which was kind of strange because, like, if you know Ed, that cold and distant was not really Ed's style. It was more like if he didn't like you, he would be warm and in your face, or he'd be hot and in your face. And if he liked you, he would. I can't tell you all the stories about him growing up and his mom and all the things that he was able to tell us about history of the workshop and our connection to what's his name, Ron Jeremy. I mean, all the different things that Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop has going. And so finally, he told me on the second show that I was in with him that he hated me during Death of a Salesman because he thought I was just like my character. And he was like, I thought you were the biggest jerk ever. I just couldn't stand you. Which is a very Ed thing too, like to just tell you, I hated you, and in his voice, which I can't do, nobody can. I think one of the biggest things that we're losing, at least as far as I'm concerned, is Ed had the perfect character voice. When he would be in the radio shows, When he played Clarence the Angel, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And the other thing is, when Ed would get mad, you knew, because the fingers went up. This was the thing right here, right? And he would start talking to you, and you just knew he had been a teacher, and that was coming out. But I know for me personally, the shows aren't going to be the same. Nothing's going to be really the same, because he brought so much, and he was such a big part of what we did. And even when he disagreed with you, I never found Ed to be a disagreeable person. He could disagree with you, and then usually it might take a little while, but usually there were no grudges. I never saw him be a mean-spirited person. And but what he was one of the most gifted people I've ever had the opportunity to be around. His costumes were impeccable. And I mean, I don't think we could stand up. I remember him telling me that he still had costumes from the musical from 3 years before hanging up around his house, because he hadn't gotten around to pulling them down. And he was just working on everything. From what he told me, it was just everywhere. And that's how dedicated he was to what he was doing and to us. So it's a really heavy heart that I have right now. Makes me very, very sad. And I hope that I hope Tom gets to see this, and I hope that Tom realizes how much we appreciate him loaning Ed to us all these years, and just how much we feel for his loss. My heart goes out to you, and I just pray that you'll find some peace in this time, and just know that I know how much you loved him. Just know how much we all loved him too.
It's kind of weird to talk about him in the past tense, isn't it? It's so very strange. And when we think about the characters that he brought to life on the stage, like Lumiere and all the others, the countless others, it's awesome to see that they were not. And this is a 100% compliment to any actor, but Ed, I think, really got it. He got it. When you can look at a character, at least from my opinion, when you can look at a character that's been done 1,000 times and be like, holy crap, he did something completely different and it's great. And Ed did that to every character he touched. There was always that Ed mark. It wasn't, you weren't watching. Yeah, exactly. There was never a doubt in your mind that, like, okay, yeah, I'm watching Beauty and the Beast. That candlestick is completely different, but he's awesome, man. It's very rare when you can find somebody who can take a character that's loved and well known and make it its own. And then as an actor or as an aspiring actress or anything, when you go out on stage, that's what you go for. And Ed did that flawlessly.
And it's so funny too when you think about it. People look at a production and they see, sets, and they see costumes and everything. And what you don't realize is every costume has to be thought out completely. Even if you're doing a modern show, like when they did, wow, the brain goes dead, but that's okay. The one a couple of years ago that went to Tanis, the one that Lori did, Rabbit Hole. Even Rabbit Hole, which is a contemporary show, and you think, oh, people just throw on T-shirts or throw on dress clothes or whatever. All of that stuff is planned completely. Like for people who aren't theater people, all of that stuff is planned, and it's planned for getting the most out of the show. And clothes become another character. And Ed always was spot on with picking out the right character for the show, which was our costumes. And I don't know that people really understand what a big deal that is. It's not an easy thing. I mean, you let me dress myself, God forbid, you'd have terrible shows. I guarantee it. I have no fashion sense. Now, look what I'm wearing right now. I'm wearing the Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop sweatshirt. Hey, we've got to continue to be advertising everywhere we go. Because this has been a rough time for theaters. And I don't know. It feels like we've been taking gut punch after gut punch. And this one right here feels like, one of those below the belts, or maybe, Mike Tyson biting Evander Holyfield's ear is what this feels like, This is just, it just feels like too much.
It's Jen, because I know I'm supposed to say my name or something, right? So I think the first time I met Ed was Guys and Dolls, and I was a hot box girl, and he was taking my measurements, and that's when I knew who Ed was immediately, because he doesn't sugarcoat anything. He doesn't hold, as everyone's saying, doesn't hold back. He tells you exactly like it is, and I knew right away that I just connected with him. I was like, oh, he shoots from the hip. I like this guy. Like, what you see is what you get. And actually, I was a little intimidated, but I rarely ever let anyone know when that is a case of the matter. But just because he was so, like, such a strong personality and so forward, and but then he gave me the nicest compliment ever that made me feel better, because he said, oh, you have a great waist, and like, something about whatever. So he liked the gossip too, which was a lot of fun, which is awful, I know, but he never really had anything mean to say. It was just Ed's stuff, which I'm sure everyone's had a taste of. But it was always fun, because when he would tell a story, or if he was annoyed at someone and he was, reenacting that story, he was reenacting whatever went down in the other room with whoever he was pissed at. And it was really funny. But then, like, right after, you would see him being best friends with that person again. You're like, that's the best part about him. He doesn't, like somebody else, I think Sean said, he doesn't hold a grudge, and he had a heart of gold. Like, whenever I walked into the room, like I would come in to the dressing room or whatever, and there's Ed, and you can't help but smile when you see him. And especially if you make eye contact, sometimes I'm a little too serious in the back, and I try to be one of the quiet people, but Ed liked to talk backstage, but he didn't ever get that his voice carried. And I'd be like, Ed, shh, Ed, I can't talk right now. I can't talk right now. But then once he got my ear. I think we stood in the parking lot after one show. I don't remember which show it was, maybe Beauty and the Beast. And I think we stood there. Everybody and their mother left. It was just him and I. And we were there in the parking lot. I swear to God, I think I left there about 12:30 in the morning. And all he did was talk. It started with one thing, and then it led into New York Times teaching and what it was like compared to what he's doing here. And his table was loaded. He couldn't even see his table because there was fabric everywhere, and his walls, like somebody else mentioned. So, like, he really was dedicated, and he really threw everything he had, every fiber of him, into it. And I also remember another encounter with like Sally's story with the diabetes. Like, not even that could stop him, even though we're all seeing him slowly go into a diabetic coma. We're like, quick, get him a granola bar or something. He's like, it's fine, I'm fine. And I'm like, we're all like, oh my God, he doesn't even know, like, he's like not even here anymore. Like, he was so dedicated with anything he did it with his all. And he was a force to be reckoned with, and so much fun to work on the stage with, and truly one of a kind. And I feel really blessed that I had the opportunity to work with him and get to know him and have a piece of his spirit as a memory. So thanks, Ed.
I'm going to throw in a quick story for you guys. Yes. I'm back. Hello. Quick story. Okay. So if you guys don't know, I am notorious for having wardrobe malfunctions on stage. It is, so many times. And there was this one time during one show, Guys and Dolls, I was Lieutenant Brannigan, for anyone knows the role. And he only had one jacket that he had for the show for the entire run. And it happened twice. The first time, got a hole right here in my armpit. Don't know how it happened, but it happened. And it was a massive one. So he was able to repair it the first time. And it happened again in the same exact place. And I go up to Ed. He's like, during backstage, he was furious. He said, you know what? That's it. Joshua, for the rest of the run, keep your arm down. That's it. And he walked away. So I just leave my arm here for the rest of the show. Someone could probably think my arm was broken. So, yep, that's how I was able to save that wardrobe malfunction. Yes, it was a very large hole. So I'm going to leave you guys with one more Ed story if you guys don't mind. All right, awesome. So I used to work at forever ago ShopRite Monticello as a cashier. Yep. And I had some doozies. If you can survive being a cashier at a ShopRite, you can do anything because you encounter some great personality. So there was this one time Ed was in the line with this other person, and this person was giving me the business about, I think I forgot a senior discount, and they were going on and on and on. Ed turns around and he's like, "Would you give the guy a break?" And proceeded to tell this guy off. And he was able to get this guy to do this before it was popular, to move 6 feet away. And he's like, "You know what? You can go ahead." So then I had a nice little conversation with Ed to try to calm him down. He's like, so after all that, he's like, "You have a great day. Oh, and by the way, all of this." He proceeds to flick the other guy off and walks away. I think he was notorious for looking out for the people that he cared about. Because it's happened to a lot of people. I've heard stories where he'll go up to people that they work at and just talk to them about, could be whatever. Continuing on, guys, for those listening, that was Peter Nastasi, that was Sean Bailey and Sally Gladden with Jennifer Nolan coming in. Thank you guys so much for listening. We're going to continue this conversation with a tribute to Ed Berens soon. So we look forward to hearing you guys, or listening, and for the next part. Well, we are continuing our conversation, a tribute to Ed Berens. So guys, you guys can just start off. It doesn't matter who starts off first. The only thing I ask is whoever starts, just introduce yourself and give us a good memory of Ed and some stories.
I'm Lynn Porter. I've been involved with the Sullivan County Dramatic Workshop since late 2014 when we did Mask of the Red Death. And that's where I first met Ed, because he was involved with the costumes, which were very elaborate. And he would always help me get dressed in my costumes, because I had a couple of different ones backstage. And that was my first introduction to Ed. I just knew he was a character. He was a blast to work with. But also, my main memories with him are working with him in other productions. I was involved with Fiddler. He did the costumes in Fiddler. But actually acting with Ed, he and I played the two clowns in the 39 Steps with Amber and Sean also. So Ed and I played off of each other, and Amber and Sean played off of themselves, and we didn't really interact that much with each other as foursome. But Ed was a blast, because you never knew what he was going to do. He just ad-libbed a lot. And he did comedy very well, but he ad-libbed it. So it was kind of like you kind of didn't know how to respond when you were playing opposite him. It was kind of like if you ever watched the old Carol Burnett show with Tim Conway, he would just ad-lib and everybody get hysterical, because you just never knew what he would do, but he was hysterical. And that's how Ed was. He played this old man. It was like crawling on the floor and trying to get up to a podium, and he'd knock over the podium, and he'd crawl over the podium to try and pick it up, and it was just hysterical. But he was a lot of fun to work with. He was very good. We helped each other out a lot. He helped me. He taught me a lot with having to do costume changes and scene changes and where to stand and what to do, because that was my first big role. And he was just a lot of fun. He was just quirky and witty, and always had a good comeback line and a good joke, and you just never knew what to expect with him. But whatever it was going to be funny. So those are some of my memories.
My name's Alexis. I've been involved with the workshop for about 10 years now. I did my first show when I was 11. And around that time was the first time that I met Ed. I must have been 12 or just turned 13. And we were doing some kind of Christmas show at the museum. It was like a really weird Christmas show, and he was involved with the costumes. And at the very end of the show was a brief, abridged version of A Christmas Carol, and he played Scrooge, and it was hilarious. My parents loved that show because they came every night, and every night they were like, it was a completely different show. You never knew what he was going to do. And, he was also, the costume designer for that show. And I think I played like a wise man in a scene, like a comic scene about, like the birth of Jesus. And I had to wear this big turban that I couldn't fit like over my ponytail. And Ed was like, yeah, just shove it on. Yeah, that was I think that might've been the first time that I had met him. I went on to do a bunch of shows with him, Beauty and the Beast, where he played Lumiere, and he was fantastic as Lumiere. And he also did a lot of the costumes for that show. I'll tell this story. Josh and Becky, you were both there for it. It was one of the dress rehearsals. And Terry had done a like thick white face on Ed to look like a candle, like a candlestick. And we're sitting down for notes, and Ed was so upset because he was sweating with all of this makeup on. And he was like, we've got to do something about the makeup. I'm perspiring. And he was like so upset. And then we were like, all right. Everyone was like, we'll figure it out. And then like 5 minutes later, he was like giving Terry a hug, and he was like, sorry, I overreacted. Like, that's just the kind of person he was. Very kind, but also like, very funny and all that. Ed was definitely the person who got me interested in costume design. I'm in college right now, getting my bachelor's in theater, and I've done a lot of costume work here at SUNY New Paltz. We were doing Taming of the Shrew. He was the costume designer on Taming of the Shrew as well. And that was set in present day. So we were bringing a lot of our own wardrobe in. So I'm, filled my car up with like, things on hangers from my own closet, and I bring them all in, and I'm like, do you want this one or do you want this one? I think I had a plain black blazer and then like a red and blue checkered blazer, which ended up going on stage. And he said, go with the red one, always make the bold choice. And I think that was great advice for costume design and for acting in theater and life. And that's, that piece of advice could really sum up who he was, of going with the bold choice. And when I had found out actually that he had passed away, I was working on a costume design sketch, and I was like, wow, that's something. So I thank Ed for getting me involved in something that I really enjoy. And I'm thankful that theater and that the workshop, was around, and that I was able to meet Ed by being involved.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Becky. I've been involved with the theater for a really long time, since I was really young, and that's when I first met Ed. I don't think I met him during the first show I did, but I did meet him during Beauty and the Beast, and he made quite an impact and quite an impression. One of my favorite memories of Ed is the time we did Into the Woods, and I played as Jack, and he put my wig on, and he was like, it's covering your face, we gotta trim it a little bit. And I was like, okay, sure, that's fine. And of course, Ed trimmed my eyelashes off, and he was like, oh, I think I cut something there. And I take the wig off, and I look in the mirror next to me, and I'm like, what did you do? And he was like, it's okay. It makes you look more like a boy. It's all right. And I'm like, okay. He's like, it fits the character. It's a bold acting choice. And I was like, okay. So I believed him, and I went this summer without eyelashes on half my face. And that was a great memory I have of Ed. Another good one is also during Into the Woods when I was backstage. He was just standing there, and I was about to go on to do like my big song. It was like the big song of the show, and I was so nervous. And he was like, hey, do you want to feel my beard? It's made of human hair. And I was like, no, Ed, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks, though. And I was like, where do you find something like that? And he said, the internet is a dark place. And to this day, he is not wrong. So I do remember Ed as a very funny character with a very interesting sense of humor. And I've had numerous conversations about Ed's life as a young teenage boy, just trying to relate to me as a teenager. And I couldn't tell you what a single thing he ever said to me was, because all of his conversations just ranged from many different topics. And there's times where like our director would be sitting out on the stage, like calling the whole cast out, like time for notes and everything. And Ed just be telling me this hour-long story. And I'm like, Ed, we gotta go. And he's like, no, just a couple minutes longer. And we would just keep talking backstage about these random life experiences that he had. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. So yeah, Ed is a big influence on me and my theater experience at SCDW, and I don't think I'd be the actor I am today without a lot of his influence.
Thank you. We were talking previously about people who had stayed outside with Ed after rehearsals or late night conversations. Did you guys have any late night conversations with Ed?
I had many. I couldn't tell you what they are. They were like Becky said, they were very diverse, and yes, and very animated at times. When he was adamant about something, or if he was angry about something, he'd wag his finger in your face. And one time I told him that he needed to stop doing that, or I was going to bite it. But he had very strong opinions about a lot of things. He made them known. You always knew where you stood with Ed, and it always was okay at the end of the night.
I think when we had done Beauty and the Beast, I had done, and Becky had done Beauty and the Beast at my high school that year too. So my parents had seen the show like 6 times already by the time that they had to come see me in it at the workshop. And they were the kind of parents when I was in high school that, you know, they weren't going to miss a show. And they loved it. They were like, oh my gosh, it's a different show every single night. They would text me like while I'm getting ready backstage and be like, wonder what Ed's going to do tonight. It was like, people just loved to watch him. Like, it was just a joy to see what he was going to do.
We were talking earlier about how he is or was a diabetic. You would never know in shows, though. We brought that up before because he would do not just these dramatic death scenes, but these over-the-top falls. He went for all the physical comedy to the point where we had to make sure that he had what he needed, but he was always willing to take those risks. I wish I could do half the things that he could do. Do you guys remember when he would drop a line or forget a line? He would start out with and it was this long thing. I don't even know what it was, but started with and he was like, hard to describe. I guess he's still trying to ponder what the next line is. And after you give him the line, he still continues with the one of my favorite things, to the point where he has people cracking up in the audience. I've seen people laugh so hard because it's the most hilarious thing. If you've never seen that, you should definitely see it if there's footage out there.
Oh my gosh, I just thought of another thing. When we did Sweeney Todd, I don't think he was in Sweeney Todd, was he? No. He just did because sometimes for a musical, if he did the costumes, he would be like, I'm here enough, I might as well just be in the show, you know? but he didn't for Sweeney. But it was like we had only been rehearsing for like a month at this point, and he comes up to me one day and he's like, I got this dress. I've had this dress for months. I ordered it as soon as we heard that we were doing Sweeney Todd, and I ordered it. He's like, you got to try it on. And I look at it, I'm like, that's not gonna fit me. That is way too small for me. And he's like, no, it's fine. It'll fit you. You're really skinny. And it just barely fit me. And then we tried it on again months later, closer to the show. And I was like, it's not gonna fit me. And it sure didn't. And he was like, I didn't like it that much anyway. So he was just so passionate about, everything that he did, that he was like, oh, I've had this for, 3 months ever since I heard we were doing the show. I got it,
Well, I got one more quick story for you guys. Have you guys ever seen or heard the production of Stop Thief at the workshop? Okay, well, Stop Thief, it was one of those shows where for whatever reason, the cast was having trouble with their lines. So me as the stage manager was asked, instead of to be in the back, I was to be up front with a little podium and the script of the show. So whenever somebody dropped a line, it was like, this is your line. And for whatever reason, I guess there was a few nights where I was just too low. Ed could not hear me. So instead of trying to like listen in and like do it in an acting way, he just stops the show, comes up to the stage and looks down. He's like, what is my line? I'm like, oh my God. Okay, let me just quickly give you your line. And instead of going back, he stayed right there at the stage and did everything so that he would not miss one line. It was another funny show. Highly recommend if it's out there.
It's going to be very different. We don't realize it yet because we've been in lockdown for so long. But once we start getting back to work, it's going to be, there's going to be a definite void there.
It's going to be quieter in the worst way possible.